मैं इंडिया पॉलिसी फाउंडेशन और सेंटर फॉर नॉलेज सोवरेनिटी CKS की तरफ से आज की इस वेबिनार में आप सबका हार्दिक स्वागत करता हूं। Today we have planned to discuss a very critical issue about securing digital boundaries of India. As we all know, 21 years ago, Pakistani army intruded into Indian territory and occupied borders. Indian army had to launch an operation, and as we know, tomorrow on 26th of July, we are celebrating the Kargil Vijay Divas. In the process, Indian army jawans and Indian army officers had to sacrifice several young, talented personnel. Several lives were lost and huge amount of resources were put into that particular war to protect our boundaries. In the recent times, we have also read about Chinese intrusion into Indian territory. 20 soldiers and officers again had to sacrifice their lives protecting Indian boundaries, Indian territories. While there is a lot of talk and a lot of emphasis on protecting our boundaries, our landmass, there is not much discussion or even awareness regarding the digital space, the digital boundaries. India Policy Foundation, in association with the Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, has decided to take it forward and to bring it to the notice of intellectuals, policymakers, and our today. For this webinar, we are very lucky to have Sri R. Chandrasekhar ji amongst us. Sri Chandrasekhar ji has been an IAS officer. He was Secretary Information Technology. He was also Secretary for Telecom. He was President of NASCOM. He is also advising government on various programs. And most importantly, as we all know, he played the critical role in launching the e-governance in India. All the, you can say, 3 different steps of e-governance program, right from, you can say, citizen-centric centers to state-level centers. So we are very lucky to have Sri Chandrasekhar ji with us. We are also very lucky to have Dr. Avik Sarkar with us. Dr. Avik Sarkar earlier worked for corporate sector. He worked abroad also, in Singapore also. Then he was brought in and he was heading the data analytics cell of Niti Aayog. He worked there for a few years. Now he is into academics. He is a faculty at Indian School of Business, Mohali. I welcome you, Dr. Sarkar. I welcome Dr. Sri Chandrasekhar ji. We also have amongst us Sri Vineet Goenka. Vineet Goenka ji has been working in the field of data sovereignty, data security. He has been member of governing council member of Railway Ministries, CRIS, and he has also been a member of task force of IT on Ministry of Surface Transport and Ministry of Shipping also. He has also written a book on data sovereignty. Along with, you can say, he is a co-author along with, I think, General Sheretka and I think a couple of others also. He is the person who has been, you can say, taking these issues forward, and which gave us an idea that IPF should also take it forward. We are very lucky to have you here. We welcome you all. We have been joined by very eminent people, prominent academicians, retired bureaucrats, and very senior social activist also. And on behalf of India Policy Foundation, I welcome you all. I also welcome Mananiya Sri Dattatreya ji. Regarding the topic, I feel that do we really have to put priority on securing our digital boundaries? Now the issue is, how do we define the digital boundary and how to ensure the protection of these digital boundaries? So I request Sri Chandrasekhar ji to introduce the topic and to guide us, enlighten us. It's a very broad topic. This is an initiation. This is a step which we are taking forward. And we hope that under guidance of, you can say, eminent people and learned experts, we will definitely, you can say, be able to create awareness about it among the policymakers, among the eminent citizens, and make government also, you can say, see the importance of securing our digital boundary. Sri Chandrasekhar ji, I request you to please.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kuldeep ji, and namaskar to all of you present here. It's indeed a privilege for me to speak before such a eminent group of people on a very, very important topic. And as Kuldeep ji was mentioning, this is a very important topic which has not been sufficiently explored or sufficiently discussed. And so I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to share some thoughts and perspectives, combining all the thoughts and experiences in the various capacities that I have been in. So the first and foremost question is, what does this expression, securing digital boundaries, mean? Because in the physical world, it is very clear, there is a boundary, everyone knows where it is, and securing it is something which you can physically see and satisfy yourself, and it's all very visible. But if you look at the digital medium, then this is not the case at all. In fact, in the digital medium, which is a completely global medium because of the internet, the flow of data, and not only data, the flow of value generation from that data are massive. They are global, they are seamless, and they are pretty much instantaneous. So it is fundamentally different in that sense from the physical boundary. The second point I want to lay out at the outset, and my apologies to those for whom all this is very, very fundamental, but I thought that in a mixed group, it may be good to set the foundation. The second aspect is that the data and the value which I talked about flows through several layers. There's a telecom layer, there's a software platform layer, there are applications, and then of course, you have firewalls and encryption and so on, which are there spread out all across this medium. And within this, you have lawful interception by states and unlawful interception by hackers. All of this exists in this medium, and we have to take cognizance of that. Now, if you look at the physical infrastructure, you have telecom hardware, you have computers, you have IoT devices within the country, which are physically located within the country as far as the digital space is concerned. But if you look at the virtual parts of it, the software platform, the software management, the updates to the software, the hardware management, all of this in today's world are typically done remotely, and that remotely can be from a different country and often is. So that's another dimension that we need to keep in mind. If you look at hardware manufacturing, for example, both telecom hardware as well as the today it is driven by global supply chains, very well connected and highly efficient global supply chains. And they have three characteristics. One is very high volume because it's a global volume, very high velocity because the movement is very, very fast. Typically the inventory is only of a few hours, not even days, and forget about months. And it is low margin in most cases, except of course where you have a very proprietary product and some unique technology involved. So high volume, high velocity, and often low margin is the other important characteristic of a lot of this hardware. Now, the other implication of this is that all countries in this space are interdependent. And this is without exception. This includes the US and it includes China. And it is therefore a myth to think that any country is completely autonomous and is able to be completely independent and self-contained. So, against this background, what does the expression securing digital boundaries mean? That is the first question that I thought we should first look at. And to my mind, firstly, the data which includes digital data, and we are talking in this context only about digital data. So data and digital data which relates to Indian citizens and originating in India from transactions in India belong to the country which has a natural right over it. I think that should be taken as a starting assumption. But let me also elaborate that a little bit. So consequently, all the data and all the value addition to that data should be subject to the laws of India. So these data that I talked about needs to be subject to the laws of the country. I'm choosing these words carefully because the value addition does not always accrue to the country. So that these two are not interchangeable. So the value addition does not accrue to the country, but it is subject to the laws of the country. I think that's an important distinction that has to be kept in mind. So basically, securing digital boundaries, to my mind, means ensuring that the laws of India apply to such data and to the value addition that arises from that data. And within this are contained issues like privacy, individual data security, national security, taxation, and of course, the foundation of it is the jurisdiction of the country in addressing such disputes, any kind of disputes. It also means that access to data, when required by the government, in accordance with the provisions of law, should be possible without being subject to the laws of another country. The key word here is access, not possession or location. Sometimes there is an illusion that if the data is located here, then that means that it is entirely under our control. But because of the reasons that I just mentioned, that is not always the case. The data might be subject to control from elsewhere. It might be subject to encryption. It might be on a platform which you have no access to. So the key question is about access, and that is what the focus has to be. Location is only one aspect of it, but not the be-all and end-all of it. So what is the purpose of acquiring this kind of control when we are talking about this sovereignty? Number one is that the purpose of acquiring such control is to ensure that by formulating suitable policies within the country, we can maximize the economic benefit to the country and to its people from the digital economy. Maximize the economic benefit to the country and its people from the digital economy, but subject to security and privacy considerations. These are not completely independent variables, and sometimes there is a trade-off between these, and at such points, a conscious decision has to be taken after considering all the factors. So when we talk about securing digital boundaries and achieving this kind of control, we have to keep in mind control over all the layers, the telecom layer, the software platforms, the apps, and wherever firewalls and encryption are involved. And to acquire such control, one needs to have adequate foothold in each of these layers. Now, this adequate presence or adequate control does not actually mean complete indigenization or erecting walls and saying that no one can come in. In fact, in the in the strange digital world, with the strange laws that it has, that can actually make you more insecure in some cases and not more secure. So, how do you become self reliant in this kind of an environment? And what does that self reliance actually mean? Because self reliance is still important, but it does not mean a complete autonomy from everyone else outside or preventing anyone else from outside from coming in. So, if you look at the data economy, which is linked to value addition, which is linked to technology development and innovation, which in turn are linked to IPR. So, the data economy runs on value addition, technology development and innovation are linked to IPR. And you look at issues like security, privacy, taxation. All of these will need to be bound together in an economically sensible and rational manner. And to the extent that the laws and regulations ignore the economic forces as well as the global ecosystem, the chances of those laws being effectively implemented definitely becomes much lower. So we need to look at the enforceability and implementability of the laws given the complexity of this medium. So let me explain all of this. I've given it in a very theoretical and abstract way, but let me take two specific examples because it is not possible to cover the entire range of areas that I outlined. But two examples I think will suffice, one in the case of the hardware and the other in the case of the software. Let's take the example of 5G telecom equipment, which today is much discussed all across, and especially in the context of the recent Chinese incursion, as well as the dominance that they have achieved in the telecom space, especially companies like Huawei, which by many accounts actually have the most advanced technology in 5G and at a very, very competitive rate, making them a fearsome competitor on the global arena. And given the kind of vulnerabilities that I had mentioned, which arise at all of these layers, and telecom is the foundation, it's the base on which it rests. So if that is vulnerable and that is susceptible, then we are obviously going to be significantly compromised in terms of national security. It's also important to understand that it's not as if it is only with Chinese equipment that we will be vulnerable. We will be vulnerable with any equipment of any country, but vulnerable maybe in that towards that company and possibly towards that country if the company is working in close tandem with their own government. So, from a national security perspective, and the current in the current context, obviously, allowing Chinese equipment or Huawei equipment to come in is seriously jeopardizing our own security. But we should also keep in mind that what are the consequences of not allowing it and how do we deal with those consequences? Because not allowing it seems almost an imperative at this point. In the world today, as all of us recognize, there are no friends. At the end of the day, you are on your own and you have to rely on your own capabilities and strengths. So the moment you shut out what could be the cheapest or the most competitive option, immediately the benefit and advantage will be taken by others who are in the fray. And therefore, you need to have a strategy to ensure that you are not taken for a ride in terms of economics, because at the end of the day, for India, we are a very price-sensitive country. The whole telecom revolution in India would not have happened if we didn't come to the current price point. So we need to have a counter strategy for that, and building indigenous capability is a big part of that. While doing so, I think we need to keep in mind two things. One is that the standards that have to be followed will need to be international standards in order for all of this equipment and all of this infrastructure to be interoperable globally. And there is a whole set of dynamics which goes into international standards and how those are influenced, etc. But that's a much bigger game in which a lot of big companies and countries are involved. But whatever it is, we are a part of the world and we cannot sort of go away from these standards and island ourselves. Otherwise, we will not even have the benefit of global volumes. We will therefore not have a lower price, etc. So that's one aspect. So how do we really get a foothold in this area where we have very little, capability at the moment? We do have significant capability. I want to make it clear that there are some very good companies in India and some good public sector organizations which have a strong capability. But taken together, they don't straddle this entire space, and therefore we have vast gaps in our capability. And definitely in the area of 5G, we need to look at what those gaps are. Secondly, we need to be careful while looking at claims of 5G technologies and see whether they are comprehensive, because 5G can be actually defined in many different ways, and you can say that something is 5G, covering some parts of 5G, but not all of it, because that's the way in which 5G with complete integration with the applications and users operates. So we should, I think, be very discriminating while looking at that from the point of view of what is it that works in the best interests of the countries. And from my perspective, I think we need to work with some allies to navigate this space. First, we need to look at those Indian companies and organizations that are in India, in the public sector as well as in the private sector and overseas, and how this strategy can be built with their involvement, participation, and inputs. Because at the end of the day, as was said by one of our earlier WTO trade negotiators, putting walls does not help companies which are not yet born. It only helps companies which are already there. So we need to work with the companies which are already there as the first layer. The second layer is to look at foreign companies which are here in India, because a lot of them are actually, they're all in fact led by Indians whose heart beats for India. And I have seen in my interactions with them that many of them are prepared to help. They may be working for a foreign company, but they are here in India. And, it doesn't take a whole lot to discern who our friends could be over there. So that's the second concentric layer that we can actually count on. And the third is Indians in foreign companies, people of Indian origin. They may not even be Indian nationals today, but they occupy very, very important positions. And that is an asset. How we use and leverage that asset is a question, but that's the third concentric circle. So we need to look at some of these strengths and then build our strategy, based on these three concentric circles. This is just one example of the complications involved in hardware like 5G. Let me turn to a different example of e-commerce platforms and the commercial aspect, and how enabling and enhancing the digital economy and the digital economy. And e-commerce is a very good example of how the wheels of the digital economy function. And it brings up all the issues of startups, of competition, of platform economy, of the network effect and all of that. And how do you foster, the key question for us should be, how do you foster the growth of the digital and the data economy in all sectors of the economy? In agriculture, in banking and financial services, in healthcare, in education. And what should our policies look like to maximize that growth and the value to the country? So here again, there need to be some very important trade-offs made. And again, since we cannot shut ourselves off completely from the world, we need to look at the dangers of different kinds of companies and the kind of monopolies that they might acquire within the economy. And I do want to mention that dominance of the market per se is not bad. If you look at competition law and competition theory also, dominance per se is not bad, but it is abuse of dominance which is and especially abuse of dominance, which causes injury to consumers, which is harmful, and that's where the CCI comes in. But if I were to put a hierarchy to all of this, the worst situation would be to have a foreign monopoly in the country, which is completely where the market is completely dominated by one company, and that's a foreign company over which there is no control. But equally, even if it's not a foreign monopoly, even if it's a domestic monopoly, I think the dangers are quite substantial. And to some extent, if you have competition, even if it is foreign competition or a mix of foreign and domestic competition, that could arguably be a better situation than being completely in a domestic monopoly. And then, of course, there are other layers like state monopoly and only domestic companies competition. But our goal perhaps should be to ensure that there is adequate competition, because that is the best protector of consumer interest. If you look at the pre-liberalization economy, I believe that what was harmful was less the kind of protectionism which was there and more the prevention of competition because of the licensing Raj. And if we had encouraged all-out domestic competition with free movement of technology, then we might actually have been in a better place, even under such a restrictive regime. If you look at the regulation today, there's a lot of emphasis on personal data protection. Now you have a committee reporting on non-personal data protection, which has stirred up a hornet's nest because it is ignoring certain fundamental economic dynamics and arguing for making available data at no cost to both the government and even to competitors, which I think definitely is not in consonance with the way economic forces work or the way the data economy works. Then one more example I just want to refer to briefly is that if you look at the hardware, sometimes we are focused on getting visible hardware manufacturing in India, but if the value addition is not significant, then I think we need to ask the question as to how relevant this is. If you look at mobile phone manufacturing, for example, even if we have a substantial mobile phone manufacturing, and we do have it, it's good. But how much of support we give, how much of money we pour into it, I think is a big question. And while some amount of protection and growth is important, government offering huge subsidies in those areas at the cost of other areas which might better be supported with that money certainly does lead to a question of what the trade-offs or value judgments are. A last point I want to make is that a lot of this data actually is vitally important because a lot of the new technologies are built on data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep, big data and data analytics. All of these rest on that. And we therefore need to figure out how we actually either create the IPRs or have a mechanism in which we do it jointly with partners where each one has a stake in it and has a share in it. None of this is possible in the digital space unless we have the necessary strength in research. And one of the weaknesses that we have had as an economy and as a country has been the very, very low research spend of most companies. And, even in the government, the research spend has been limited. In this area, a lot of the research actually happens in the private sector. So that's something we need to think about. But a key aspect in this is that in many countries, critical technologies in the digital area have come because of defense demand. And currently, our defense requirement, notwithstanding being one of the largest importers of the world, is very loosely connected with the private sector and is by no stretch of imagination a driver of research in the private sector. Thankfully, that is changing now under the current set of policies. but still very slowly, and I do worry that there isn't adequate clarity as of now in terms of how exactly this dynamic will work out. But I think we are headed in the right direction. So the bottom line of all of this is that securing our digital boundaries is critical, both for our economic as well as our national security. But in today's world, it's a complex issue, and one needs to approach it with a clarity on the definition, a clarity on the ends that we are trying to achieve, and by means of a carefully calibrated strategy, which is based on alliances and partnerships. Whom can we trust? Whom can we build a long term partnership, which is not based on dependence, but which is based at one level on trust and alliance, but at another level, having a gun to each one's head so that you can't completely, pull the trigger and without harming yourself. That's the way in which, in today's interdependent world, these alliances are built up. But our laser sharp focus has to be on continuously building national capability across the spectrum of digital technologies, either ourselves or in through these carefully structured partnerships. So let me stop with that. Thank you. And of course, as we get into the discussion, I'll be happy to respond to any queries. So back to you, Kuldeep ji.
Thank you very much, sir. You have, in the very brief, you can say, duration, you have touched upon larger issue and provided insight into what digital security means and how we can go ahead to secure it. Now I'll request Vineet ji, Sri Vineet Goenka, as I introduced initially, he has been working in the field of data sovereignty. And earlier he was with the corporate sector, and then he resigned and became a political activist, and then he worked with government departments. Of late, he is mainly, you can say, interested and working to ensure and to spread awareness about data sovereignty, data security. Viniji, there are issues. See, India is such a vast country and such a diverse country. And of late, we have been, you can say, moving in the field of moving in the direction of digitization in finances, in technologies, in education, every sphere. You can say now we are moving towards, you can say, digitization. Now, at the same time, you can say, having such a large population, we are also highly vulnerable in terms of, you can say, digital security. People are not very, you can say, aware. There is not much, you can say, even we can say technologically also we are not very sophisticated and prepared. So you have been, you can say, working in the field of data sovereignty. You also written a book also, co-authored a book also. So how do you see all these issues in terms of, you can say, defending digital boundaries, the challenges which we are having in terms of, you can say, not only the enemies who are, you can say, based outside and, you can say, trying to cause problems within India. And as you know, and we have discussed all these issues earlier also, that whatever digital medium we have been using are you can say, not in our control. So enemy countries, enemy, you can say, people, there could be, you can say, digital terrorist also. You have been working in the field of, you can say, ensuring safe interaction on social media platforms also. So I would request you to provide all the perspectives to ensure the digital security. Now over to Vineet Goenka.
Thank you, Kuldeep, and pranam to all the people who are there. I'll start because you have set a very nice present. So let me not speak what I had written and answer to you what is there, and that will make more sense to the audience or the participants who are there right now. I happened to be in a roundtable conference and where serving Inspector General of Maharashtra Police was participating. And this gentleman, those days, used to head the cyber cell of the Maharashtra Police. And this meeting happened somewhere in November 2019, as latest as 2019. And he quoted one example, and he said he was facing challenge in RA Colony environment protest. Now, I come from Mumbai. I'm born near to that place. So I know that it's a small place where there are activists who are trying to protect that piece of greenery. They may not agree with the government's view, but I know each of them personally, and I know them for 3 decades. So I know that those guys are very nice people. They are nationalists. They are not against the country. Yes, they may not like your ideology. They may not like central government's ideology. They may not be liking individual in the ministries, but they are good people. But how come there were tweets which were coming up, and this officer brought up some tweets. These tweets were in Marathi, a local language, native language, and which not only talked about the issue but challenged and were in some words which were undermining the entire authority of the state. And it was something which was decisive, which was not been heard. So I called up a couple of these activists and asked them, hey, I know you. Even if we have difference of opinion, why are you putting such harsh words? And why are you being propagating this kind of thing? And they said, no, this is general public which is doing it. And so I had a reason to ask this officer, who is a very senior IPS officer heading the cyber cell, that how come people speak about this particular tweets and this particular issue? And he said, Vineet ji, none of the issues or none of the tweets have come from Maharashtra, let alone Maharashtra. They have not come from India. They all are originating from Pakistan. Now you can see it's a weaponization of a tool called as social media, and that too in a native language which we are not imagining. So the impact is very big. So I can go on giving you this kind of weaponization of social media, weaponization of data by our adversaries. I'll give you another example. One of the economists in a show today morning talked about India imports almost around 5.2 lakh crore rupees worth of goods from China and exports only 1.2 lakh crore goods, leaving a trade deficit of 4.2 lakh crores. Now I'll give you this 4.2 lakh crore sounds very big, but one of the component in this is almost around 23 crore rupees. Now, if you see 4.2 lakh crore rupees and versus 23 crore rupees, it sounds very, very stupid and minuscule. But what is this 23 crore rupees import which we do? So, if you know about Maharashtra, there is a place called as Pandharpur, and every year there is a Wari. Wari means pilgrimage go to Pandharpur on a particular day, that is on Ashadi Ekadashi, and they pray to Lord Vithala there. And what do they have? They have a small thing of a metal which is called as tal. वो बजाते हैं और उस बजाने के धुन से वो आगे जाते हैं. This tal was traditionally been made by the people who are there, जिसको हम महाराष्ट्र में लोहार कहते हैं, blacksmith जो है वो बनाते थे. There was some understanding. Somebody understood that so many tals are required every year. The cost of the tal is not more than 60 to 70 rupees per piece. Somebody understood that the manufacturing cost is not 60 rupees. So they were dumped at less than 40 rupees per tal in Maharashtra to that locations where this is in bought. You try to buy this in Delhi, you will not get this because Delhi is not a place where you get tal. But if you go to Pune, you go to Prabhani, this is the places where people buy. And the landed cost in Prabhani was much less than the manufacturing cost of this. And if you imagine that the only sole reason of the cost of dumping is less because there may be some labor arbitrage in China or something else like that, answer is no. There is a state sponsorship to this particular dump which is there, and they do not dump items which are very big and which you can immediately pay attention. The dumpings are done to the items which are less than 50 crore rupees annual import, 100 crore rupees annual import. Attention won't go there. And how do they do this? So now then, to understand that, how do they understand this market? How do they flood this market? Erode the entire manufacturing capability of the natives, replace the natives with imported items so that you don't have a skill. Then I'll have to go back to a conversation which I had with Vice Chancellor of Gautam Buddha University, Dr. The Vice Chancellor there. He gave me an example. We opened the floodgates somewhere in early 90s and we started importing technology and gave praise to people to manufacture or integrate refrigerators at home. Now I am a 71 born. So I saw one fridge which was bought by my father. It was there till I got married. It was there, and every 2 years we should repair it, tie some strings to it, but work it out. But all of a sudden, new companies came in, and these refrigerator companies would integrate or assemble things in India. And so we started importing, the compressor which was there. As the compressors were imported, so we did not need a manufacturing unit in India. As we were not having manufacturing units, nobody was employing the people who were coming from university. So university stopped teaching what is the heat exchange or the compressors. Resultant is what? Today, if as an India, as a country, we decide to manufacture compressors, Sir, we don't have teachers who can teach compressor technology or heat exchange technology. Resultant is, even if you want to migrate back to indigenous technology, you will have to create curriculum, you will have to create teachers and then do it, and which will be not less than a decade long. And who decides this? And how does it come? So then we have to understand one thing which is called as colonization. And we, authors of this book, divided colonization in three parts. We see colonization to simple three part. One, military colonization. I don't have to explain. All the people who are here are senior. Military colonizations we have seen for 2000 years. People came with stick, sword, gun, cannon. They colonize us. And what happens to colonize? Then you have to see the GDP and the export data of 1840s versus 1940. The drastic fall shows that colonizer would take the advantage. Then the last 100 years, colonization migrated from military colonization to something else, and which was energy colonization. And we saw that the countries which exported oil, which exported petroleum products to the user country, and especially we as India, who imports a large chunk of energy, are dictated terms. And then we also saw economies which were not exporting oil to us, we were not importing oil from them, but yet they dictated terms to us. Isse tel mat kharido, isse ye mat kariye. And then they were also dictating what technology will be used in automobiles. So even when there are alternates to petroleum products, when there are alternates to hydrocarbon, yet we were using it because those who were benefiting out of that economy forced to use it. So this was energy colonization. In the last 2 decades, 20 years, we have seen new type of colonization, and this colonization is data colonization. What does it happen in this? Somebody plays with your data, understands the data, retains the data. So when you generate data, whether it is your personal data, whether it is in structured form, semi-structured form, or it is a non-structured form, it is collected somewhere. Somebody who has a power which of computing, maybe it is analysis under whatever name, quantum computing, or whether it is data analysis, he can generate information, also generate reports, generate information sets which will be used to take decisions. And we all know, as we are all coming from senior positions, information if available, decision making is better. Informed decision making makes perfect decisions. And so somebody decided to take the decision. While we were becoming victim of this part, where we were having an advantage till 1995, 97, 98, yet we decided to open the floodgates. I come from Mumbai, and there was a place in Mumbai called as SIPS. In this SIPS, there are 5 buildings. Name of the building is SDF, Standard Design Factory. When I joined SIPS in 1995, they were all, software hubs. The people were working in software industry, and I was working there as one of the guys. So I asked them, why do you call this SDF factory? They said, ये अभी नहीं, ये तो बहुत पहले यहाँ पे factories हुआ करती, बहुत पहले यानी what? So till 1989, 1919, Tandon used to make some chips there. Some Mr. Naik used to make chips there. So we realized that the moment you open the floodgates with multilateral agreements of WTC and all, we lose the edge, and we started importing chips. And that was the first time when we realized that colonization has started. And so, they replaced the domestic indigenous production. Over the period, we became service guys. We started participating in services. So our policies were framed like that. And then we were given to an advantage. It's always advantageous to buy economical goods from outsider rather than making your own products. And then compulsions at home made us to go away from research. Resultant in what? Resultant is we depended on a lot of input. What is today's import? We are importing nothing but social media. Data which comes to India, and I hear all the seniors who tell me that it is imperative that we have exchange of data. If you believe in the researchers, 91% of the data which we import is tribal data. Most of them is porn, which is absolutely not necessary. Impacts the culture of this country, also impacts the capability to generate economical sets by the youth, because they would waste time there. And 9% of the data which is economically viable, which is knowledge which is imported, which is needed for business or other activities, only 9%. Now, let me open the eyes of many of the people who are this. Out of this 9%, not a single percent of a data can be imported by us without paying for it, without seeking information, permission of the person who holds the data. They are not freely available. Their knowledge, their IPs protected by the respective people who have written it, respective countries. Whereas we have been told that 95% to free aata hai. और वही 91% जो फ्री आता है वो तो पूरा यूजलेस है, that is jumping and creating the scene. Now let us compare these 20 years where we had advantage, lost the advantage and came to this situation where today we are discussing all this versus what Chinese did. And before this, many of us do not like Chinese. We all have some kind of anger against Chinese. Maybe because of the recent issues, or maybe because I've been learning this from my childhood. Gayi bhumi wapas lenge, kisse lenge, Pak se lenge, Chin se lenge. So probably that way. But what they did is two simple theories. One theory was Great Wall. Second theory was penetration or encroachment. Now, what was Great Wall? China. Every sixth person on the earth who is born is a Chinese. So is Indian. But we never thought of this, that 6 में से एक बच्चा हमारा और एक बच्चा उनका, 15% उनके, 15% हमारे. Chinese put a great wall. They said, no, you cannot access Chinese people, you cannot access Chinese economy, you cannot understand what is their pattern of buying. See here, my sister, when she sends me Rakhi, she puts the Rakhi first on the social media and then the Rakhi courier comes to me. Now somebody who wants to analyze would know that what type of Rakhi has been purchased by Indian girls. And somebody may decide to only manufacture those kinds of Rakhis. And Indian traditional businesses which used to make Rakhis, they may not have access to this kind of data. You understand, this is a tribal small business, but this business is killed. So they created a wall. They did not give access. We called them communists, we called them names protectionists. But if you ask other countries also, many developed nations, go to Vietnam, go to Europe, they also have put in some kind of walls. They may not have put in that kind of wall which Chinese put, but they've also put some kind of protections for themselves. And we let alone our entire borders, digital borders open. And what did Chinese did? They did something called as penetration and encroachment. And when I say Chinese, please compare this with other countries also. And rightly said by Chandrasekhar ji, we do not have any friends in this digital economy. There is no friend. So what Chinese did? They did penetration. How did they do the penetration? First penetration was economical and cheaper. What example I gave you? वो छोटा सा जो भजन करने के लिए लगने वाला यंत्र है, ताल. That small piece, which is not more than 25 crore rupees economy in this country, even there they had an encroachment. They just wiped out that particular business from India. Two, strategy was to dump things. Now, whether the Chinese dump things here, or if you go and see what happened in the case of the agricultural molecule, which was bent, the pest, I'm trying to recollect the name of that, androsulfan. Yeah, in the case of androsulfan, somebody came and just replaced that. I remember my father used to buy something called as, I don't know, heat or some kind of thing, which used to put in a small pump and pump it out in the house. And we would get rid of mosquito, cockroaches, everything. Very simple, one particular thing. And it used to take care of the thick 20, something like that. But slowly, nobody understood, and we thought it is only problem of agriculture industry, it is only problem of pesticide. Or 300 crore की तो बात है, क्यों हम इतना हंगामा कर रहे हैं? We killed not only Excel Care Crop, but other pesticide making companies also. And what we did is we started importing these molecules. Now you have kala heat for machhar, lal heat for cockroach. So I asked them, क्या फिर lizard को मारने के लिए yellow heat आएगा? Grasshopper को मारने के लिए green heat आएगा? The farmer who is not educated, who has less education, who has already been challenged to understand other things, now he has to understand 42 molecules to get rid of the pest in place of what he used to have earlier, a broad level molecule. Now these kind of penetrations were planned by not only China, but other economies. And they may be sounding friend to us right now, but they may not be our friends when it comes to business. And how did they do the third penetration? They did the third penetration in your language, in your native language. TikTok came to us not in English. It came to us in Malayalam. It came to us in Tulu. It came to us in English. It came to us in Assamese. It also came to us in languages which you and me not be. Irani. Irani is a small language, a small pocket of people in Maharashtra who speak this language. Now, this was native pumping, which we do not think necessary that time, but that's the way they do encroachment. Now, when these things happen, encroachments happen, what happens to it? It leads to a lot of business loss. So, to say that the data can travel here and there, it is not important to the data. We'll have to come to today's topic, which is digital economy. Data becomes very important. I'll give you two small examples, and then I'll go to the part where in 5 minutes I'd like to close my part. I have a friend who is from Coimbatore. He is into business of cable TV. Somehow his business was getting challenged, so he was unable to pay to the manufacturer of the set-top boxes. One fine day, all his subscribers who have this set-top box, they got a message that this cable TV subscriber has not paid our money, so we are stopping the services. Answer is, how is it possible for the supplier who sits from Delhi to do this? There is some backdoor in the small setup box. Chandrasekhar ji would know that we have been fighting that particular case. And somebody couldn't decide to do it. Today, he just wrote that one particular line because he had a fight with this cable TV operator. Tomorrow, they could have flashed a message which is against this country. Third, they could have played with the democracy of this country. If somebody has this kind of thing. I also heard one example from Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, and which I like to share here. There was a tunnel which was being dug. While digging the tunnel, the machines which are worth few hundred crore rupees were used. All of a sudden, the machine started dysfunctioning. Engineers tried to repair it. It did not get repaired. Finally, they had no option but to go back to the manufacturer of the drill machine. The manufacturer said, "Aapka kuch payment baki hai. You have some payments pending. Please pay that and the machine will start." Payments were done and the machine started. I asked Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, what is the concern? He said the concern is if they have control of the machine, they would also have the data which is generated by IoT which is situated in that particular machine. Is the thickness, hardness of the stone which is there? How much is the length? What is the geospatial data? The latitude and longitude of the drilling position. And they would know what we are drilling, where we are drilling, and for what we are drilling. Understand, if your tractors have this device, they would know 4 months in advance what you are going to sow and reap. So they would know what is the supply of particular food grain in your country versus what is your need and demand. And then the gap they would be analyzed by them, and they may choose to dump a food grain which is far cheaper than what you are producing here in India. And that thereby they can create another kind of hierarchy, whatever you say in this. So let me sum up in the next 2-3 minutes. Whoever controls data controls everything, not only controls the data, but also controls the economy and the mind of the people who are using this data. The people who generate data are basically the slaves or the victims against whom this particular data will be used. So it is necessary that not only that keeping the data in our physical control, which is localization, but also have a sovereignty over that, sovereign right over this, so that the data do not go out. I personally do not believe into any kind of orange, green, and all this red data which has been described. I have met the NSCS, gave my recommendations. We have been fighting this particular part, and I think powerful people are there on this particular panel who can influence the government to decide this particular part. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and that what is missed. I always wonder one thing when I study China and versus Indian losses, and Abhi would have heard this from my mouth 2-3 times earlier also. The length of the wall of China, the Great Wall of China, goes in thousands of kilometers, whereas the gap of the Khyber Pashtun gap or the Khyber Pass gap, from where all these attackers came in, whether it is Alexandra, Sikandar, or whether it is Gauri, or it is anybody else, is only few kilometers. I always wonder, unke purvaj, their ancestors could build that thousands of kilometers of wall. Mere purvaj, my ancestors, why they did not create this 2 to 3 kilometers of wall? My civilization would have saved. My country would have been 4 times bigger than the country which is right now. My religion would have been bigger than what it has been right now. Probably that vigilance which was not there. Taking it very lightly. So digital boundaries have to be defined. It has to be defined whether it is civilian data, whether it is strategic data, whether it is important data, non-important data. It's a national issue. It is not a local subject. So there has to be some kind of law to be passed where we have a data commission or a data authority which talks about this. We also have to fix responsibilities of the fiduciaries which store this data, which sell this data. And I agree with Chandrasekhar ji, the current committee which has been appointed absolutely did not consider. And see all the people who are there. And if you see their incidents, all of them have worked in multinationals and their interests aligned with one particular country. Today we may be happy with that, but tomorrow it will be biggest challenge. We do not have anybody in that particular committee who have served this nation as an army officer or an police officer who also has to deal this. Not a single LEA, law enforcement agency person was there. We do not have anybody who comes from academics who understands this data in that particular team. So I have my own reservations on that particular committee. So data localization is not a protectionist move. Let me stress in bold highlighted words. Data privacy is a very big myth if you do not have data protection laws, stringent data protection. And data protection law is a very big myth if you do not have data sovereignty, if you do not have data within your own control. जो आपके हाथ में है नहीं, उसके बारे में क्या चर्चा करेंगे? There is a saying in Marathi, जो तड़ राखे तो पानी साके. तड़ यानी जो पानी जो तालाब को रखता है, जो तालाब का रक्षण करेगा वो तो पानी पिएगा उसमें से. The person who would protect the data would use the data. And how would you know that the data is not being used? So if you really want to make sure that the way I'm cursing my ancestors for not building that 3 kilometers of road in the cyber personal way, our next generations, our grandchildren should not blame us for not taking decisions in right time. I always feel pained when I see my own colleagues going on television and blaming Nehru and all the other seniors, yesteryear's prime ministers, that they have not taken decisions, and so we suffered in the northern part of India. When it is true, do you really want that after 30 years or 40 years, some other spokesperson of some political party come and blame you, saying that you did not take decisions when you were a decision maker, when you were in task force Vineet Goenka, when you were secretary Chandrasekharji, when Avik you were in Niti Aayog, you did not take decisions. So I think probably we'll have to take care of that. History will never forgive us if we don't take these decisions today. So my request to all the people is, it is not about आज की अर्थव्यवस्था. आज की अर्थव्यवस्था तो डगमगाई हुई है क्योंकि पिछले लोगों ने गलती किया, आगे की डगमगाएगी क्योंकि हमने अगर गलती की. So data is very sensitive. Data would generate sets of information which will help the decision maker to take decision, and we will have to control that, whether it sounds good or whether it sounds bad, whether it is in the agreement of multilateral agreements which we have signed in WTO, RCEPs, whether it is SARC or any other agreements. We'll have to rethink about this. Even if we have a favorable government, we'll have to push through this particular fight. Make sure that our interests are protected, our coming generations' interests are protected, and they do not blame us the way we blame people who were there in 30 years or 40 years before us in the power. I would like to thank Kuldeep ji to give me this uninterrupted 20 minutes, and I hope I did not exceed my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinayji. Thank you very much for, you can say, giving us an insight into the issues which we have been studying, which we have been working on, related to data security, data sovereignty, data localization. Now I would request Dr. Avik Sarkar. Dr. Sarkar has been working in the field of data analytics, public policy related to data. Dr. Sarkar, my request to you is to kindly enlighten us and to provide us, you can say, very critical information in a very limited period which we have today. What is the importance of data, how data is being, you can say, collected, and how it has become a very deadly tool, not only for, you can say, economic superiority and even we can say economic exploitation, but in terms of strategic issues also. What is the importance of data and how we can protect it, and what are the, you can say, policy initiatives which have been taken? So could you please elaborate on that, and whatever you want to add from your side, that's always welcome. Thank you, sir. Now, Dr. Avik
Yes.
Sarkar.
Thank you, Kuldeep for this opportunity. It's really very interesting to talk to the esteemed group of people. It's always very interesting to listen to Vinitji and really love the examples that he presents. Thanks for that. Chandrasekhar ji also gave a very nice overview of the domain. I think that was required given that the diverse set of people that we have. I think he covered the aspects very well, starting from the basics about what we are talking about, securing the boundaries, and what needs to be done. So I think that is exactly what we have been talking about today. Like as Vinitji also told, today we are talking about boundaries and the data of Indian citizens or data that is generated in India. So that is the type of data that we want to secure, and as both of the other speakers have also highlighted, how can we use that for our economic development now, and also set a roadmap so that this data can be used by Indian companies or for the development of the Indian economy in the long run. I think that is some of the elements that we have to focus on as we go ahead and stuff. We were discussing about the access to data, and data access is an important criteria, and why we talk about this thing. So I think many of you would have seen that as a part of any investigation or part of certain data analysis, there is a lot of data requests that goes to all these global companies like say Facebook Twitter, Google, and things like that. Like as Vinitji was talking about this Twitter post, these tweets coming from people possibly in not so friendly countries across the border. If you can actually intervene when the first tweet is generated from such a location, then you can actually act on that and delete that tweet immediately. So for that, what is required is that if there is a request from the Indian government, say to access this data and to know where the owner of the data or the tweet is coming from, if we can know that in say 5 to 10 minutes time, a very very short time, so we can actually stop it from spreading. But then the fulfillment of requests that when it goes from India for these companies, because these are primarily the US companies that we're talking about, Google, Facebook, Twitter. Facebook, I'll take the example of Facebook because Facebook puts every year the data requests that they get from different countries and the fulfillment rate. Fulfillment rate is like if they got a request to share a certain data for a particular country and how much the fulfillment rate has been. So if you see the fulfillment rate for Facebook data request for by US is about 90%. But for the data request that has been made by India, it is only around 40%. So there's a huge difference that we are talking about in this case, and that is one of the very important things because we know that this is a notorious post that is going on Facebook. We want to stop it, but we cannot do much about it because unless the parent company gives us access to that data. So that is an issue that possibly when we are talking about this data privacy bill that is currently under the parliamentary committee, will take care of some of the issues. And though there is nothing mentioned about the timelines for the data access that has to be given, this is an issue that I think we will see much more discipline among these internet companies when this data privacy bill comes into place and the data fiduciary and the data authority is used and they can actually work with these people. So one is the access to the data. Often when we talk about access to data, say you've come to know that say Avik Sarkar is sending unlawful messages from an outside country. So you try to access my messages and stop it. But then if you just access messages for say 1 or 2 or 3 people, it doesn't give you a trend. As Vinitji was talking about the various examples of those musical instruments or the rakis and the stuff like that. So to understand the trend from the data, you need to access the whole huge amounts of data. You need to access the entire amount of data that is there. Maybe they generated in all the Facebook posts, all the Twitter posts generated in Maharashtra and get a trend from there. So to do that, you actually need to access to this data. Now, this is something that our non-private data bill that is there has started talking about, but again, it is talking about in a language which might not be accepted by this private company. So I don't know if anyone, if you looked into it, there was Google, for example, came up with Google mobility trend. So there were these various areas that are there that people go on, say they are looked into areas like say places of travel, like say bus stations or airport or railway station. That is a place of travel. Then say school, offices, and that's places of work. Then there is a places of market or recreation. So they have taken this 6-7 type of areas that people usually go to. And what Google had done during the corona pandemic is that they have shown that there is a normal rate in which the people comes there on every monthly and daily basis. And during the pandemic, how the numbers actually came down for a lot of the areas. The number of people who are coming down, in some cases it was drastically coming down by a certain percentage, and you can just Google mobility trends India and you will find that report. So this is the type of insights that policymakers need to know. There was a huge debate and news happening over over this migrants going back to different people. Until now, we are using the state government machinery and the Narega jobs and to understand how many people have gone back to these different areas and how they are doing their work. There is a depth of mobile phone data which is lying with Indian companies like Airtel or Jio or Vodafone, which can be used to find out the trends of how people have gone through. So their permanent location was say in Mumbai or Delhi, and now they are based in some other location. So this sort of mobility data is of huge benefit. So I particularly it is very useful for a lot of the cases. Like say when the Uttarakhand disaster happened in 2013, I had myself worked on those data for the recovery of people from that location. Like how could you recover and know how many people were stranded there just based on the mobile phone record. So these are some areas where you need access to huge volumes of data to use it for your governance purpose or your social benefit purpose and things of those nature. The other aspect that comes about is the aspect of innovation and IPR. As a country, we have to make the data sharing with startups much more easier so that they can come and innovate on that data and create more indigenous products. That is one of the very important thing, and we have to promote that. As Mr. Chandrasekhar currently pointed out, that lack of research is a very crucial factor. I think Vinith also touched upon that point from his compressor example. I think that is a very important factor that we have to look into. Is that we have not looked into. Say, I'll take an example. Chandrasekhar ji talked about the telecom infrastructure. There are 4 companies. 2 European companies, Nokia Networks, Ericsson, and 2 Chinese companies, Huawei and ZTE. And these are the 4 players in the market. They have been doing business for the last 30 years, and India has not tried to even enter this field. They are completely relying on those players, and they are not even trying to create indigenous solutions to this thing. Now, yes, when you create something, it might be expensive. It might take you some time to get a market share. So, but even if you have some amount of market share, that is good. But then the trial is not there. The effort is missing, and there is little government intervention also that is happening on those areas. So, if you are talking about the example like a tractor or any other equipment, getting details about the machines in India, we are doing very little innovation in this field, which needs to be promoted. Like building indigenous manufacturing in India, which is India-led, is also one of the important things. So I think these are some of the key aspects which I will focus on as we start, and then we can take further questions down.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sarkar. Thank you very much. Now I'll come back to Sri Chandrasekhar ji. Sir, since we are discussing on, you can say, securing digital boundaries, and there have been, you can say, instances, and there have, you can say, various possibilities or risks mentioned by the speakers. Do you feel, I think the idea has already been floated by some people, do you feel there is a need for National Digital Security Commission which can work among various, you can say, nodal agencies, security agencies, armed forces, intelligence agencies, and government departments, so that we are able to, you can say, protect our digital boundaries? That is one part. And the second is, do we also need to take initiative in terms of creating our own indigenous, you can say, solutions, networks, platforms, search engines, to ensure that the data remains in our control? You talked about, you can say, data access. You said that data localization itself may not be sufficient. So on these 2 aspects, I would request you to, you can say, guide us.
So I think, Kuldeep, both the questions that you have posed are, I think, very, very important questions. On the first one, given the cross-cutting and sweeping nature of the digital medium, any action to secure this space has to be coordinated across government. It cannot be very clear that it cannot be just an action done by the security agencies or by the by the armed forces, much less by MeitY or organizations like Certain. So definitely a kind of cyber command is absolutely critical, and different countries have actually looked at that. In fact, I had occasion to look at some of the models and examples. But I think the practical problem is that getting all of these agencies together, and more importantly, getting people from these agencies who are sufficiently knowledgeable. Because I think one of the things that a colleague had once pointed out, and that's a term which I think stuck in my mind, is the divergence between knowledge and authority. So people who have the authority don't necessarily have the knowledge, and people who have the knowledge don't have the authority. So I think the question is to put together this kind of cyber command which combines both the authority and the requisite knowledge, and then assigns tasks to different entities based on a strategy and on a plan which is worked out, is important. Every country has recognized this, and there is no escape from that if you really want to secure these boundaries across all the layers, across the data, across the platforms that Vinitji talked about. All of these are absolutely essential. So I also am aware, if I'm not revealing any official secrets, that this is something which is being attempted, but somehow, putting all this together has just not quite happened. What did come out of it is the National Cyber Security, the National Cyber Coordination Center, the NCCC, which is completely different from the concept of the Central Cyber Command. So these examples are there in the US, it's there in some of the European countries as well, and most certainly we should be thinking about it. And the second question, sorry, could you just repeat the second one?
So second was about creating and developing indigenous platforms, indigenous solutions, like China has done.
Right. So, the thing is, I think the dilemma for us is that, Chinese have done it in a certain way, which is consistent with their environment and their system of administration. It's a one-party system. It's a single government. They don't have a system of elections, etc. And they were able to go down this path of shutting themselves off behind the great firewall and building their own, platforms. What that has done is, while it may have taken them some time, it has then enabled them to use technologies developed in other countries, but then, work on their data to build newer technologies like AI and machine learning, which, as I said, are dependent on this data. The second thing is that in a country like China, individual privacy is not accorded a very high pedestal. In fact, individual privacy as a concept, especially vis-a-vis the government, doesn't exist. While that may have, some implications in terms of the nature of freedoms in that country, as far as development of these technologies are concerned, it was a fantastic situation where all data could be used, including personally identifiable information, to build tremendous intelligence. So the only downside is that it is on their population, and to the extent that that is not representative, there may be need to tweak some of those technologies. Now, coming to the question that you said, how do we do that? So every country, when they look for a solution, has to look for it consistent with the setup that you have and the ethos that you have. We have a slightly different ethos where individual privacy has a certain place, where the competition has a certain place. The combination of private sector and public sector has its own space, and recently the government has made clear that as a strategy, the government would like to step away from business and leave it to the private sector, except in certain critical identified areas. So the default is that it is the private sector which has to do this. So the Chinese way of actually getting these platforms built by their own companies. I mean, it may nominally be a private company, but we know that in China, the distinction between private sector, public sector, and government is completely different from what it is in other countries. And at the end of the day, all these threads lead to the government. So that is again something which is very different from the way things operate in India. So the question that arises in the Indian context is, how do you enable private companies in India to build these kind of platforms that can rival the global platforms that we are currently seeing within the country? The weakness that we have had is that while we have become a fairly large IT, where we have a fairly large IT capability and we are sort of recognized as a global player in the IT space, we have not really built too many products, too many platforms. There are exceptions, but as a general proposition, that has been our weak suit. So how do you actually do this, and to what extent does protectionism form a part of that strategy? Right now we have, for example, banned 59 of the Chinese apps. Some of them are very big platforms like TikTok, which had 120 million active users and several hundred million users. But the result of that ban is that it will shift to other platforms which are still non-Indian. And whether that ultimately makes us sufficiently secure and self-reliant is a question. The other question is, can we go so far? Should we go so far as to actually put some kind of an embargo on these platforms the way China has done? Once again, our position is different. We, for whatever reason, people of Indian origin are actually heading a lot of these companies, whether you take Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella or some others. And in a sense, it's not that they are working for India. It's not that that the companies are working for India. Certainly not. But one has to consider the fact that that does have some material bearing on the way in which we can leverage these things. We have to look at what are the ways in which we can leverage some of these situations. The second thing is that India and the US do have a kind of partnership. There may be friction on many areas, but we do have a partnership in the technology space. Now, Avikji was just mentioning about the key telecom players. The interesting thing to note is among those names, there's no American player. So now the question is, can we, for example, have a strategy where we work along with US and build a certain capability in which both have a stake, which rivals some of these products? Can we build a product in which both have such an interest that neither can do without each other? Of course, it's always great if you can do it entirely on your own, but in the technology space, particularly given our relative positions, it's not as easy as one may think. So these are the kind of questions that I mentioned, that some of these partnerships have to be done with friends, but knowing that there are no real friends. So at the end of the day, you may do it with friends, but each of the friends has to have such a hold over the other that they cannot think of separation. So these are the kind of, I think, questions that we need to look at. So the bottom line of what I'm saying is that it may not be, the best course for us to block these entities, but actually to create conditions in which there could be Indian entities also which are creating platforms which are in competition with these companies. And there I think we need to look at issues like market dominance or abuse of dominance or ways to ring-fence it. And I'm afraid that if there is no direct government support, after all, we are supporting, for example, the hardware manufacturing I was mentioning, 41,000 crores to the tune of 41,000 crores. There's no reason why some of these platforms should not also be supported similarly, because if they are not supported by the government, then I'm afraid the commercial forces and the way that they operate and the network effect which gives these large global platforms such a dominant position will completely eliminate all Indian players from the market. So I think we have to have a combination of cooperation and restricting within a certain space the existing platforms, and then try to build some platforms of our own. But I'm not very sure whether we can think of completely eliminating such platforms.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I would request some of the participants who have raised and who have shared some of the questions, doubts which they have. First, I would request Shri Ajay Veer Jakhad. Ajay Veer Jakhad ji is presently chairman of Bharat Krishak Samaj, as well as he is chairman of Punjab Farmer Commission. Ajay ji, please share your question.
नमस्कार जी, मेरा क्वेश्चन दो क्वेश्चन है कि क्या डेटा को टैक्स करना चाहिए, क्योंकि बहुत सारे देशों में ये सवाल किया जा रहा है दैट वी शुड टैक्स डेटा टू गेट रेवेन्यू फॉर द कंट्री. एंड सेकंड इज कि जिस प्रकार से जियो कंपनी बन रही है, मोनोपोली बन रही है फेसबुक के साथ, कई गूगल के साथ, अमेजोन के साथ उनकी पार्टनरशिप आ रही है, वो सारा डेटा इंडिया में स्टोर होना चाहिए कि फेसबुक के पास रहना चाहिए? दीज आर टू क्वेश्चंस. अगर कोई इन पे बता पाए, बहुत बहुत मेहरबानी. थैंक यू जी.
अजय जी आज से वेरी पर्टिनेंट क्वेश्चन है. मुझे लगता है कि टैक्स होना चाहिए. उसके दो कारण हैं. एक कि हर व्यापार का जो नफा करता है उसमें का एक हिस्सा देश में जाता है, तो देश के बाकी जो टैक्स का जो पर्पस है तो पर्पस फॉलो होता है. एक, और ये तो इकोनॉमी बड़ी थाउजेंड्स ऑफ करोड़ की इकोनॉमी है. हिंदुस्तान टैक्स एडवर्टाइजमेंट देता है, रेवेन्यू जनरेट करता है, उनका कैपिटलाइजेशन करता है और हम उनसे टैक्स नहीं करते. लेकिन मैं उसके बियॉन्ड जाता हूँ. आई एम ट्राइंग टू गो बियॉन्ड दैट. जब आप टैक्स लगाते हैं तो उसको बुक्स मेंटेन करना पड़ता है कि पैसा कहां से और कहां गया. उसके प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस के साथ में उसके इवन बुकिंग्स कहां से हुई थी वो पता चलेगा. मैं आपको उदाहरण देता हूँ. मैं एक लड़ाई लड़ रहा हूँ कुछ दिनों से. वो लड़ाई है कि ट्विटर ने जानबूझकर खालिस्तानी टेररिस्टों के पास से पैसा लिया. उन्होंने पैसा लेके प्रमोट किया उस ट्वीट को. जब तक वो ट्वीट केवल ट्वीट था तब तक वो डिबेट था कि वो फ्री स्पीच है, इंडिपेंडेंट व्यू है या नहीं है. बट द मोमेंट ट्विटर मनी, ट्विटर बिकेम एन हैबिटेट ऑफ टेररिज्म. इट्स अ पार्टिसिपेशन इन टेररिज्म. तो अगर टैक्स भरा जाएगा तो बुक्स का फंड्स रहेंगे, और बुक्स का फंड्स रहेंगे तो कहां से पैसा है ये पता चलेगा. तो मेरे ख्याल से ट्रेल ऑफ मनी के लिए भी टैक्सेशन होना चाहिए. कम हो ज्यादा हो वो तय करने वाले लोग, सीबीडीटी तय करे या फिर कोई और डिपार्टमेंट तय करे, लेकिन टैक्सेशन होना जरूरी है मेरे ख्याल से.
So, Kuljit, can I go on that? So I agree that tax is a good thing to have, but my challenge with that is that if we are talking of one type of data, एक तरह का data का हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं. If that data is given to Facebook, they have 100 other types of data. They can use it for a big economic gain. Or say that data is shared with Jio. They have many other data about the user. Suppose मैं आपका और मेरा कुछ data का बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. Like suppose our location on a daily level is shared with Facebook and Jio. They can use this data and earn a lot of revenue, advertise other thing. If it's shared with a startup who do not have these other 100 data points, they might be able to make only 1 rupee. So my challenge whenever I talk about tax, and I've spoken about the tax issue with Meti officials also, is that at what rate can we tax other people? That is where my challenge lies. The other alternative that I provide is that if you are taking data for citizens of India, then based on government and some mutually agreed rules, you should be making data available at a particular granularity that can be used for economic benefit. And for that, we need a dedicated data cell. मतलब not in मीडिया टाइप में ऑल इंडिया लेवल पे डेटा मिनिस्ट्री चाहिए. अभी हमारे पास सिर्फ स्टैटिस्टिक्स का मिनिस्ट्री है, which is to do with doing surveys, as all of you will know, and generating insights out of surveys. But when we talk about big data, or say transaction data on Amazon, transaction data on Facebook, Google, and if you have to generate insights from these huge volumes of data, we do not have a assigned body who can do that. आज के दिन में डेटा हम लोग दे भी देता है, उसको माइन करके उसका एक प्रोटोकॉल डेवलप करना है, having the security protocol, having all the blockchain protocol, and then deriving insights and using that insight for governance and policy making and for helping back the businesses in the country. We don't have that protocol at all. There, जैसे विनीत जी बोल रहे थे, if our like children wants to remember us, children, grandchildren, I think that will be a good contribution, because we are at that time where we are data security, privacy bill लिखा जा रहा है, non-personal bill लिखा जा रहा है, and we are in that favorable age. We are all working in the favorable age. If you can make a good contribution and come up with something along those lines, that will be a much bigger impact than tax. And if nothing else, then taxing is I will think taxing is the easier option. And generating data insights is a more harder option.
Yeah. So I would like to share some thoughts, because I think that this is a very, very important question which has been asked. And also, I think especially if you look at it from the context of, let's say, a sector like agriculture, there are many interesting questions which arise, which also provide some clarity on how these issues need to be dealt with. First and foremost, if you look at agriculture, then we need to take into account the fact that creation of data and generation of data is not a costless exercise at all. It's a different matter that a company like Facebook or a company like Google may get a certain amount of information. For example, what people are talking about, whether people are worried about the crop or the weather or pests or something like that. And a certain amount of intelligence is abstracted from that. But if you are looking to get information about, for example, the soil condition, the actual rainfall, and when we talk about actual rainfall, we are not talking about state or rainfall in a district. We are talking about rainfall for that particular location, right down pinpointed at that location. So that kind of information itself costs money. To collect that kind of data costs money. It can be done at a very nominal cost thanks to IoT and connected devices. But in the future that we are getting into, where everything is connected, is operating through connected devices, there is a cost to collecting and creating this data. And then there is an economy which thrives on the data by way of value addition. So the principle that we have in the GST also is that all value addition is taxed, and all of these transactions as they take place with the data. After all, the person who is investing some money in putting IoT devices to get the soil conditions, or putting devices to gather localized weather conditions, or putting cameras to see the condition of the crop, is making an investment, and there is an expectation of a certain return on it. So there is certain data coming in, and there is a business interest also which is attached to it, and that economy has to be allowed to grow. You see, I think sometimes we get too focused on what the government needs to do, but the fact is that these are basic economic forces that are working, and the taxation on the same principles that we have in the rest of the economy, which is, as there is value addition on these tax, as the transactions take place on this data, those will get taxed. They are bound to be taxed because there is no exemption for those kind of transactions under the goods and services tax. Whether it is treated as a good or as a service, maybe there may be some debate, and it may lead to some variations in the percentage. But that's not the important point in this context. In this context, it is subject to taxation and it will be taxed. The other important question which was raised was, वो data कहाँ पे रहना चाहिए? इंडिया में रहना चाहिए या ये वो कंपनी में रहना चाहिए या बाहर फॉरेन कंपनी के साथ हो सकता है? I think that it's difficult to give a very blanket answer for that. I think that one should be careful about what data we mandate should be held within India. For example, obviously any data which is sensitive from a national security point of view has to be held in India. It cannot be accessed by outside people at all. Certain sensitive information like financial sector information or health sector information, which the government has considered sensitive and which the PDP bill recognizes as highly sensitive personal data, also may have such stipulations attached to it. But for other kinds of data, we need to first convince ourselves of what is the risk if the data is not held in India, because there are certain efficiencies which are available. And when we say that the data should be localized, we are imposing certain additional costs, we are imposing certain additional restrictions, which do have some implications for the commerce that surrounds it. So while as a general proposition, the restrictions need not be put across the board, it is only when we recognize that there is a problem, then such a restriction can be put. If it is supporting the agriculture market sufficiently well, then the most efficient method of providing that support, should be adopted, so that the agricultural operations are supported in the best way possible. So I would think that we should not very lightly or casually resort to measures which interfere with the economics of the data economy. And that is, in fact, the problem that I was pointing out in the reference to the Non-Personal Data Committee's report, where there are interventions which actually will have the effect of impeding the data economy. So I think that is the critical question. And the whole of agriculture, where we have had very low productivity, very low increases in productivity, is crying out for use of these technologies, introduction of precision agriculture, introduction of IoT for better monitoring of agriculture operations, linkage between crop lending, crop insurance, and cropping practices, so that the farmer is at least de-risked in the farming. So there are lots of very, very exciting opportunities in agriculture through the use of these technologies, which the private sector should be encouraged to build that whole economy. There's a huge economy which is possible, which doesn't exist today. And that is what I think we should be encouraging. Taxation will happen anyway, and I think it is bound to be there, and it is not exempted at all. So that is my take on the question. But it's a very interesting question, I believe.
I agree with my fellow panelists and others, but let me give you 3 examples, which is not related to today's topic at all, but it impacts our today's topic. 3 countries got liberated or established, or whatever word you want to do, because I'm not a student of history, so I don't want to quote years. But check about China. When did it get, whatever formation it has today, or Israel? So it was all late 40s or early 50s. So I'm giving you deliberately 2 examples. Israel, very small, maybe probably 10,000 Israels will be around India in the geographical size or whatever economic size. China is maybe bigger than us for whatever. Then how come both the economies, whether it is Israeli economy or Chinese economy, have overtaken us in technology? So many times, this compromise of going together with a powerful economy, going together with somebody who already has a lead, makes us subdued. We'll have to somewhere take a call. And there are only 5 E's to it, sir. I'm very small. My age is not even equivalent to your experience. But sir, education, engineering, engagements, elimination, and ensuring. These are the 5 E's which I understand, which made Israel what Israel is today. What they did is they simply put Center of Excellence as Educational Center, where they dedicated one lab for one particular technology which they thought will come out after 10 years. Engineering, they funded the engineering part, they partnered with the private economy and created that kind of thing. They engaged government, academicians, and also industry. But at the same time, you see these economies either openly like China or hidden like Israel. They have eliminations of competitions which were landing there. So you cannot go into business in Israel, like even if it is open economy. Under some of the other pretexts, they will make sure you are not there, sir. They will make sure their interests are protected. And then they had policies and laws which will forbid competitions to their existing industry and existing policies, protocols. Reason because they wanted to secure supplies and sourcing both. They wanted to secure their safety and also their security. So we will have to come back and think that is it only knowledge and authority which makes it, or also the belief in the system. So we'll have to believe in this country. Belief has to be created by our people. Sir, very humbly, let me tell you, I'm a son of a humble son. But the belief of my organization brought me up here. And without that organization and without that belief, you cannot reach things. So my request is what? Taxation does not mean additional burden to him. We can have a negative taxation, sir. We have seen that turnover-based taxations are there. While we don't tax a shopkeeper who has X amount of tax turnover, we have taxation for a shopkeeper who has more turnover. But both of them have to keep their books. Resultant is what? Government can create data sources to understand what is the supply mechanism, where is the source of funds coming up, and what is utilization. So while if a particular tax has been impacting the service of the economy, we can create incentives to counterbalance that. So what you can see is if your business is small, it is impacting directly, we will have incentivises. So my request is that when the policy makers make policy, when we all push the policy maker to make policy, or we are part of the committees, like when I was part of the Surface Transport Committee, I made sure that I used the word called as Swadeshi when we were talking about online vehicle smart model. That if the vehicles are moving and if you know the data goes out of the country, they would do what they did with the Iranian journal. And so we had, and there was a resistance from everybody to use that particular word. But this is not that I have a fantasy or romance with the word called as Swadeshi. Reason is because I wanted to protect all my strategic assets to move in this. So when I objected that we cannot go and give leverage of the railway locomotives to the international agencies, or maybe people asked us, why can't you go and take Google Map? And I'm using this word. But the reason I insisted and forced that we should do it through ISRO, even if it is late, and we have still not completed all the mapping of all the locomotives, reason is because that thought of protecting your own interest. Why would I let somebody know which battalion is moving from position A to position B on my Indian railways? So this particular part, we'll have to always consider as citizens of this country. Israel, not geographically what is the size, economically what is the size, population wise what is the size, the threat which he has are more than the threat what we see from Pakistan and China. Yet if they can dominate this space called as security, or China, which also got liberated, or whatever kind of economy they came up, in the same time when we came up, sir, we will have to understand this particular part, that there is one element beyond knowledge and authority, and that element is belief.
Thank you, Vinayji. Before you can say going ahead with the next question, I'll read out a comment made by Sri Manya Dattatreya Hosabaleji. Need for all-round awareness regarding data security, data protection, data sovereignty, etc. cannot be understated. Awareness and activism among the official establishment, professionals, academicians, researchers, social activists, etc., and a comprehensive legislation are the only bulwark against encroachment or misuse. Unfortunately, the establishment, which is so sensitive about official secrets, mostly ignores the huge and significant data flow out of the country unchecked. If Avik would like to make a comment about, you can say, data and data flow, and then we can take next question. If you want to make a comment on this,
yes. So this is a very relevant point what Dattatreya has made. I think awareness is one of the biggest issues about data sharing. And a lot of the data leakages that we see happening around us is also because people are unawarely sharing data, like say a list of people named with Aadhaar number has been shared by some state government official. So this is a big awareness issue that is there. how to say when we use our own machine, like a laptop or desktop, even many of them are logged in. We never encrypt our laptop or desktop. What encryption means that even if your laptop gets stolen, someone just picks up your laptop, they cannot decrypt it. If you have encryption, it is not just the password. Password is to log in, but if your hard drive is encrypted, these are very basic things, but these are not communicated to a lot of people, and and is not part of general knowledge. Like say, we know that we have to keep our doors locked, we need a big lock. But for data security, I think these aspects and knowledge are not a part of our usual training, and that is a big lacuna that's there. And this thing has to improve a lot more.
We have with us Mr. Sudhanshu Singh, who is working as an advisor with the Haryana government in the IT field. Sudhanshu, would you like to ask a question? You have raised a question regarding data governance and the coordination between states and the center. Would you like to ask this question?
Yeah, thank you, Kuldeep. Yeah, see, what I've been observing is people have been talking about digital divide. That digital divide means IT penetration grow, more and more people should have computers so that we can use IT. So the thing is, what I've seen is in government, decision making regarding data, generating insights from data is found to be delegated to a lower level. That is, I don't think that level of training happening at senior post level where they can do this what if analysis. So the thing is, you have data, because both the capability of certain tools, you can generate insights, and once you generate insights, you know that what kind of more data you require, what type, so that you can have different types of insights. So and this I feel could be there within the state, between the state, as well as between state and center. Most of the data I've seen is being present in the form of table or form. Tables, that's all. Very few graphs and charts. And we're talking next level of analysis. What if?
Sarkar, would you like to answer this?
So I think I agree to what Sudhanshu was telling. This is a huge issue. He's actually at least even talking of data being shared in tables. A lot of the time these tables are either PDF table or a printout that has been taken and someone has actually signed that table and then it has been sent. So the very aspect of machine readable data and sharing of machine readable data, we do not have the protocols for that. Even if you see the MOSPI report, the Ministry of Statistics report that has been published today, they're all like PDF reports. We do not have the data in an Excel format that can be used for analysis immediately. People like us, we are in academia, we have to spend hours of time and resources to extract that data from PDF into Excel format and then use it for our analysis. So there is a large lacuna that lies there in data sharing formats. When there are international formats and established formats that exist, like APIs for sharing data, this sort of formats are not at all used by the state government or even the central government officials for data sharing. So this is a huge lacuna that remains. I think people who are within the government now have to influence that more data is shared in machine readable format.
Thank you, Sarkar. Dr. Sarkar. Now I would request Dr. Gopal Parihar. He wanted to ask a question regarding, you can say, giving access to foreign companies to collect data of all the, you can say, visitors to the Kumbh Mela. Dr. Gopal Parihar.
Yes, sir, I wanted to know, I mean, we have allowed many foreigners to have a recording in a big gathering like Kumbh Mela, and where they study behavior, etiquette, facial movements, and our choices, etc., etc. And then later on they use for artificial intelligence. But have we done any kind of check to stop all these foreigners to get into? I mean, isn't it unethical? We haven't been informed before taking these data. Can't there be any kind of code of conduct of data ethics? This is my simple question. I mean, this is a breach of privacy. It's a big threat, big harm for an individual.
Yes, no, that will be really good thing to have. I think a lot of the time when they are recording stuff in such events, they take a blanket approval that this is for personal use purposes. And then if the data that they're collecting, the videos and other things is for personal use, then that's completely allowed. But if they are actually using the data and then using it for a commercial purpose or even for terrorist purposes, like what happened for the Mumbai attacks, we came to know that there were some visitors who actually came to India and they were taking images of buildings and which were later used by the terrorists for the attack purpose, which is common knowledge for everyone now. But this sort of thing, like the approvals are given, I think, quite easily. But I think, Chandrasekhar ji, you have been in the secretary position. I think you might be in a better position to see what sort of guidelines we have on those front.
I'm not aware of any specific guidelines with regard to recording of such public events, because these are public events. Quite often, in general, it is left to the local authorities, meaning the state government and the local authorities, as to whether these permissions are given. So now the question which arises also is whether it is for personal use or for commercial use. And to my mind, again, it's very to draw that distinction. If somebody is says it's for personal use, and that recording has a big commercial value, how would it be even possible to monitor this is being for commercial purposes? So I think it is whether such permission needs to be given, and the second thing is that there are so many people over there who also are making recordings for themselves. Is photography prevented? If photography is prohibited or video photography is prohibited, as we used to have in the airports, that can be enforced. But if it is not prohibited, then the whole question of how do you implement or enforce these restrictions becomes. It's a totally different question if there are no restrictions in general. So I think the first question is, for large events like that where we have a apprehension of people or inimical forces creating a situation, first and foremost there has to be a ban on photography or videography in that area. And then the question of permissions will follow from that only people who are authorized can actually take videography, and that too after appropriate permission. So even at the points of entry, these things are verified, as for example we have in other restricted areas. So I think that question relates to what are the physical rules already in force at that particular area. So I don't think that you can have a blanket arrangement in a country like ours.
Thank you, sir. We also have Sri Gopal Krishna Agarwal ji with us. He is an economist and he is a spokesperson for BJP. I would request we have Professor Sushant Mishra ji. Professor Sushant Mishra, sir, Gopal ji had asked a question about the Kumbh Mela, which had been answered in detail. You have any other question to raise related to education, data and all?
Sir, actually it is the same question but in a different garb. He asked about something else. My question is, when the government agencies also come, for example, Harvard University coming, individual people coming and recording is something different. When researchers en masse come and collaborate with the government, for example, in Kumbh Mela and Sonpur Mela, the Bihar government and the UP government clearly said that we are going to collaborate with Harvard researchers and then coming to collect the data on food, what kinds of food are being sold. So now when this kind of clear instructions and clear guidelines are given, what clearances do these agencies like Harvard University researchers, because they don't come as individuals. It is not about individual recording. It is clearly mentioned intent that I am going to collect the data on this particular item, all the food items being sold. What clearances in this regard are required for such agencies? Yes, sir. Over to you, sir.
Sir, Chandrasekhar ji.
I think in cases of research and academic institutions, generally speaking, authorities are slightly more liberal in according such approvals. However, I think it is absolutely important to ensure that the purpose is verified or the purpose is first stipulated, and the second is that use for any other purpose should not be allowed without approval of the authorities concerned. By and large, I think some of the reputed institutions definitely do adhere to these guidelines, which is why it is also important to ensure that those to whom such permissions and approvals are given are reputed institutions for whom an agreement or a consent means what it says. So, limitation of purpose is an important aspect of it, and ensuring that any deviations from that are only after approval by the authorities concerned. Some of this research, I think, is also used by the authorities themselves for either better planning or for future improvements in the arrangements and so on. So that's when the approvals are given, the presumption also needs to be that the authorities are seeking access both to the data as well as to the information that is abstracted from the data that is being collected. So that's the situation.
Yes. So, Kudinji, if I just can add one line to it. In the proposed data privacy bill also, the personal data privacy bill also, there is a few things, exemptions. Exemptions is personal use, journalistic use, and research use also is one of the items that is listed there. So, whenever you use the name research per se, I think you get a leeway into getting the data. And it is usually expected that if you are collecting data in the name of research, you will remain ethical and you will not use it for commercial purposes. So otherwise research cannot happen. And it can be both Indian research organizations or outside research organizations. So I think that much trust is given to them.
Yeah, just want to add one more thing that, I think we need to also distinguish between privacy in a public space and privacy to your private transactions. And I think the concept in law, at least, is quite different. You are not entitled to privacy if you are on the street. I mean, there are cameras everywhere and the cameras take your pictures, and are in a public space, then to that extent, your privacy is not absolute. Of course, at the same time, it doesn't mean that, there are famous examples of celebrities who go to a restaurant, for example. And if you are in a public restaurant, then yes, you might be photographed. But if somebody comes and very invasively tries to take pictures coming, 1 foot or 2 feet away, then that is seen as harassment. So there are all sorts of fine divisions, but suffice it to say that the concept of privacy in a public space is different from the concept of privacy in a private space, including your transactions on the digital medium or your emails or pictures which you exchange with somebody or something which you put on a social media platform with limited viewership. So I think everything has to be seen in the context in which it is occurring. Not, again, it cannot be an absolute factor. It has to be seen in accordance with the law.
Thank you, sir. Before we conclude, and I request Professor Kapil Kapoor to make a comment, I would ask IPF Research Associate Lakshmi Parmeshwaran. She has raised a point. Lakshmi, would you like to ask a question? Lakshmi?
Yes, sir. So my question is, a significant portion of India is still illiterate or semi-literate. In such a scenario, what is being done to spread cyber awareness among them?
I think that the question that you have raised is very pertinent in the sense that we are living in an environment where very well educated, very well informed people are actually falling prey to all kinds of scams and all kinds of security breaches, including financial security breaches. So anybody can fall prey if you are gullible enough. Number one. Number two is that for people who are, increasingly we are having people who are literate, not literate or semi-literate, using the net with the advent of voice-based and picture-based services. And that is actually drawing much more people. So icon-based menus, visual-based content, and voice-based commands. All of these are enabling literate or semi-literate people to come online, and in fact to become literate by virtue of coming online. So the old concept of becoming literate first and then becoming cyber literate is giving way to the reverse, which is to first become cyber literate and then get normal literacy. So how do you make such people aware of the risks, or what are the things that they should watch out for? And I think that a lot of this education and awareness has to be done in a context. Because if you, for example, are communicating this as a general lesson, then first of all, there is absolutely no guarantee that people will be listening or will absorb it. But if you are transacting with a bank, for example, and let us suppose that there is a semi-literate person who is transacting on a mobile phone, then the messages which are coming from the institution providing that service, saying this is a threat, this is what you need to be careful of, etc., do certainly help. I'm sure all of you who use net banking would see the kind of warnings that come before you access the service. So in a similar manner, I think whatever service is being accessed by the user, the caution should be in the context of that particular service, and it should be obligated by law that such restriction should be there, in much the same way that when people go for a public issue, there is a statutory warning, or when people make any kind of offer, then there is a warning that comes with it. Apart from that, of course, general public awareness campaigns as a part of literacy and cyber literacy campaigns are being done by the government, but I believe that not on a sufficient scale. So that is again something which also needs to be extended.
Thank you, sir. Now I request our chairman, Professor Kapil Kapoor, sir, to give his, you can say, remarks regarding this webinar. And if he wants to, he has been a, you can say, renowned educationist. He has compiled and edited 11-volume Encyclopedia of Hinduism, also Encyclopedia of Indian Poetics. He was Pro-Vice Chancellor of JNU and presently Chairman of Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. Professor Kapoor, sir.
Thank you, Kuldeep ji. I've been listening with great interest, and it has been a very, very fine learning experience for me. Today we had three very learned speakers, and I felt that they complemented each other. Chandrasekhar ji in the beginning, gave us a kind of virtually a complete lesson in digital boundaries and how to protect and all that. And then Vineet Goenka ji, being young, he talked of the threats to those boundaries. And then Avik Sarkar ji, rejoined by saying how those threats can be met or or minimized. So there's a wonderful circularity about today's session, and I am very grateful, sir, on behalf of India Policy Foundation. It is my great honor and privilege to thank the three speakers very much. I have a few thoughts which I will like to share. They are not very pertinent, but in my thinking, I think I am a little non-modern. And non-modern doesn't mean primitive; it simply means non-modern. And non-modern could be as good as modern. I I think that our country has failed. Our policy makers have failed in two or three ways. You see, first, unlike China, we did not really understand the importance of allowing even the foreign technologies or platforms to operate in Indian languages. Now, for example, Microsoft, when it went to China, China said, okay, but in Chinese. They said, no, sorry. They said, okay, then don't come. Then now when sometimes you're working, you are asked whether you want the Chinese or English. So nativization of Western technology that the China did, and secondly, protection of their own infrastructure of small manufacturing industry, protection. They transformed that from painting of flowers and trees to manufacturing small parts of the hardware equipment. It was because they maintained it, but we destroyed our village handicraft and industry considerably. Secondly, we told Microsoft, please come in English. We will teach everybody English. So now today you have problem of literacy, cyber literacy, because the language of this technology is still mostly English. And secondly, I think our rulers failed in failing to cultivate self-confidence in the people and a lack of self-respect in our own abilities. So we became what in a Hindi film, Mahmood, I think most of us may remember that man, comedian. He said, international fakir aaye hain. He called Indians international fakirs. So we have been great borrowers. We have borrowed everything. Instead of inventing and creating, which would have been possible if we had self-respect and self-confidence, and if we had operated in our own languages. Today, Vinitji told us that the Chinese come and operate in your languages. Their TikTok and others, in the Indian languages. But we are still hung up on this. And the divided India, as somebody said, divided India, not only rural and this, but also English and non-English and so on. The third failure, I think, is I think I have mentioned two. One is kind of failure to innovate and create ourselves because of lack of self-confidence and not realizing the significance of language of technology. And I think we were basically an oral people. I remember that the Marwaris, they did all their transaction orally, and the word of mouth was honored. They left no traces of their transactions or business to be tapped and hijacked and others. I remember that 3 years back, that there was a news that the diamond merchants of Surat, they transport diamonds from one city to the other with nondescript incognito people, their own workers. There is no written documentation. There is just trust. So they cannot be tracked or traced. Now, from our oral culture, we have moved to this visual culture, the Western visual culture. And in the Western visual culture, writing or whatever, even computer is writing, and the visible marks on the, they are the ones which are processed, which are captured, And I think digital knowledge, as one Japanese professor pointed out, digital knowledge is only information. It is not knowledge. It is quantifiable, measurable information. And it is important in three areas: economics or commerce, defense, and internal security. In three areas. As far as the private public use of these platforms is concerned, social media, they are misused by enemies of the country. But an Indian using a social media proves no risk, is not a risk at all. So the Indians are basically talkative people. So we talk too much on the mobiles. We use, if you go outside, you rarely find a person in public talking on the mobile phone. But here you find people shouting on the mobile phone even in public. I think थोड़ा सा हमें cultural reversion की भी जरूरत है. And as for cultural, we have to remind people that for India, silence was the great virtue and not speech. हमारे बड़े बूढ़े कहते थे, कम बोला कर, कम बोलो. But the movement we have taken place, we have to take the building of walls, as Vinitji said, the building of walls. The walls are not only geophysical, but walls are also, as he said, in the digital boundary, but walls are also in cultural gaps that we have created. I think those will be filled through education, proper education, which we right now don't have. I think, close these reflections by saying that it's a wonderful session today, and I learned a lot. Thank you very much, sir. The three speakers. Very grateful that you have agreed to come. Sir, we hope that you will be obliging us again when we need you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, and certainly.
Yes. Thanks for this opportunity. Really nice interacting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar sir. Thank you, Dr. Avik Sarkar. Thank you, Vinitji, and thank you all the participants who have been, you can say, listening and with interest, as Professor Kapoor said. And it was wonderful. Thank you very much.